Hello and welcome to today's A-Team webinar. We are talking about improving data integrity to address regulatory requirements today. My name is Andrew Delaney. I'm Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group and I will be hosting today's session. As usual, we'll be talking to a panel of experts to discuss the theme of the day. We would encourage you to participate through our polls and by asking questions. We do that through our Slido device, which you should see on your screen adjacent to seeing us. So let's take a look at what we will be talking about. Financial institutions today are facing a regulatory landscape that is characterized by rigorous and varied reporting requirements across their businesses. The challenges they are facing include more data fields, across more lines of business, reporting with greater frequency, all of which is adding complexity and cost. At the same time, regulators are showing waning tolerance for errors, issues, or delays, notwithstanding the ongoing pandemic. This sort of heightened level of regulatory scrutiny is making it more critical than ever that financial institutions remain in control of their data. It's not that easy. Many don't have a true golden source of their key data sets. That makes it difficult for them to reconcile data either internally or with their counterparties. And what that amounts to for some large firms is really having to deal with millions of exceptions every day. So huge costs, huge complexity, quite a few problems. Clearly, this is something firms need to address, and that's what we're going to be talking today about. So without further ado, let me ask our panel of experts to introduce themselves. First of all, let me welcome Arvind from Scotiabank. Arvind, good to see you.
Same here. Thank you, Andrew. Well, my name is Arvind Joshi. I am the Data Governance Officer for US Finance within Scotia. And my team is responsible for data management and data governance activities across the bank, specifically for finance. And I represent finance and the name and the face for any data-related issues internally and externally as well with the regulators.
Very good. Thank you and welcome again. Next up, we have Shailesh from AIG. Welcome, Shailesh.
Thanks, Andrew, and I'm glad to be here. I'm Shailesh Mathankar. I'm responsible for all of our data and analytics for AIG's legal compliance and regulatory functions. So in my day job, I'm pretty much responsible for anything and everything to do with data and analytics when it comes to legal compliance and regulatory data set for AIG.
Great, thank you very much. And finally, Neil from Gresham Technologies.
Yeah, Neil Vernon, CTO for Gresham. So I run all of our product development and product strategy. Through our Connect and Control products, we enable customers to acquire regulatory reporting data, cleanse that data, publish that data, and then reconcile it back and forth with the regulator and the various reporting repositories. So looking after the flow soup to nuts for many of our large customers. Very
good, thank you, Neil. So let's start with a poll to get you going on the Slido. We have a poll already in place. We're going to ask you, the audience, how satisfied you are with the quality of the data used in your trading and investment workflows. I'm going to assume that none of you is completely satisfied as you're here on this webinar today, but we're giving you a couple of other options, whether you're mostly satisfied but acknowledge there's still work to do, barely satisfied that data integrity is an issue, or completely dissatisfied, and that you have an unacceptable level of errors. So why don't you go ahead and vote using Slido, as I say, on the screen. And while you are voting, we'll proceed with our Q&A. We'll come back and look at the results in a moment or two. So let's kick off with a sort of a scene setting type of question. I'll pose it to Neil. What, Neil, do you see as the data challenges facing practitioners as financial institutions attempt to streamline their trading and investment workflows?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think, and I'm going to be quite disparaging later on in answering this question. It's going to start off and acknowledge that the practitioners and the people on this webinar, it's a difficult job. You're in complex organizations. They're siloed organizations. They're siloed across a product, and they're siloed between products. The way fixed income do something is different to the way that equities do something. The way that New York does it is different to the way that London does it. And data attributes that you would think would be common and consistent and comply to common and industry standard formats end up being not common, don't comply to industry standard formats. And data is difficult to get hold of, difficult to secure the quality of, becomes inconsistent. So there's a whole raft of data problems that everybody on this call will be very, very aware of. However, I also think that there's a degree of organizational, and I hesitate to use the word, but organizational incompetence. And I've got a snippet here, actually. It's from the Wall Street Journal. So one of the banks misreported. They misreported in commodities. And the Wall Street Journal, that learned organization said in commodities where there are so many complex fields, yeah, it is complex, none of which are clear. Yeah, that's difficult to understand. The regulations go on for pages and pages. It would seem to be easy to get something wrong and possibly incur a fine. And the notice explicitly states the bank were not deliberate or reckless. Well, firstly, I'd say if you don't understand these things, you should not be trading them. You should not be trading things you don't understand, no matter how complex they are. If you don't understand them, don't trade them. But actually, if you look at the detail of this, and this is where my incompetence comment comes from, this bank were reporting buys as sells. They didn't even know which side of the equation when they were on. There has to be some inspection as to how can you possibly get that reporting so wrong. And I think part of the problem is it ends up in a deep back office function, a cross product function, and people fail and they don't have an understanding of the data. And I'm feeling myself getting really agitated by this. So I'm going to hand off to Arvind to give Arvind's view before I get really angry about it.
Neil, do you think that's a micro problem in terms of, do you think it's a lot of individual people not talking to each other, or is it a sort of a top-down macro type of problem within the organizations?
I think it's a macro problem. Everybody knows. You can go into any one of these organizations and they will tell you, we have a problem with LEIs. We have a problem with maturity dates. We have a problem with cancel trades. But they don't do anything about it. And actually, and I'll talk about this a bit later on, there's some other questions I'm aware of, I don't want to steal my own thunder. But I think it is a macro problem that people are failing to grasp the problem and deal with it.
Okay. Arvind, over to you on this. Data challenges, they sound significant from what Neil was saying. Why do you see them as significant as well?
Well, adding on to what Neil was mentioning, definitely it's a macro problem, but it's like trying to change the tire while the car is moving. That's one aspect, so trying to put in new data pipes or data flows. And then there's also more pressure. New regulatory expectations are coming fast and furious. And then the regulatory scrutiny is also getting more stringent and then more detail oriented. They want, especially from transaction testing perspective. So regulators are also expecting for the banks to showcase clear ownership from front to back. And at a granular level, so that also adds to the complexity. And with the legacy operational systems, where there's much of product overlap or coverage overlap across multiple systems, makes it even more harder to streamline or try to think to streamline a particular system without impacting multiple lines of business.
Very good, thank you. Well, let's have a quick look then at the poll results. What we're seeing is that just over 50% of you are mostly satisfied with your setup, but you acknowledge that there is still work to do. Just 11% completely dissatisfied, and a third barely satisfied. Nobody's completely satisfied. I guess that's a good thing. Let me ask the panelists, anything there surprise you? Any remarks to make on that?
Yeah, if I can, and to continue my rant actually. So ESMA produced a report this week on the quality of regulatory reporting data. And I'm amazed that people are at the 50% mostly satisfied. Read the report. You know, you're unable to report maturity dates. You're not valuing derivatives trades on a daily basis. And actually, you're not valuing on a daily basis. You're not valuing on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. There are 4 million, actually, calm down a bit, but there are between 4 and 11 million, and this is amazing that ESMA don't actually know, but there are between 4 and 11 million derivative trades that are published daily to ESMA, dating from 2015 to 2019. Now that's literally years ago, where you haven't revalued them. You can't be happy with that. You know, the most basic thing, what is the value of my position? And between 4 million and 11 million trades, we don't know what the number is, aren't being valued. We can't be happy. It's wrong. And I'm sorry, and I'm conscious. I can't see anyone still on the webinar. I'm conscious that people will be turning off and being annoyed with me, but it is an annoying subject.
I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Neil. I'm surprised at the results too. I mean, we can't be like more than 50% of people completely satisfied with the data quality. I'm really surprised.
Okay. Well, so let's move on a bit into what people are actually doing about their data issues, assuming they have them. For those people who have identified their data issues, let's stick with you, Shailesh. How are firms currently identifying and addressing data quality issues by data overload of legacy systems operating in siloed lines of business? And if we're not succeeding, why isn't what they're doing enough?
Yeah, so I think in the current environment, all of these data quality issues, in my experience, they're being identified at the point of consumption, right? So whether it's for the regulatory reporting, or whether somebody's trying to build an analytical model, or somebody's trying to answer a business question, that's when people start to look at the data and say, oh, this doesn't make sense. Looks like we have some issues going on with the data. And at that time, then they're trying to clean up the data, do something with that, exclude some of that data in their modeling or in the reporting before they're doing any sort of reporting. They're cleaning up the data at that point. And I mean, it's not sustainable in the long term. I'm going to give you another analogy that Arvind was talking about earlier, trying to change the tire of the car while the car is running. I'm going to go with the boat. So you're in a boat and you have a leak. You have water coming in, and all you're trying to do is just pick a bucket and throw that water out. You're not trying to fix the leak, right? So yeah, I understand, like immediately you need to pick up the bucket and start to throw out the water, but at the same time, you need to start looking for ways to fix that leak, right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, go back to the root of the problems, right? Where the problem is, we need to go back there and try to address those, so we don't have to do this every time we need to do a regulatory reporting, or every time we need to run a model or build a model.
Very good, thanks, Shailesh. And in bearing in mind that we're going to come to how people should be addressing these issues a bit later, Neil, in your travels and in your conversations with clients, how do you see people addressing these problems? Is it about bailing out rather than fixing the leak, as it were?
Yeah, and I just absolutely, completely agree with what Shailesh says. It is a bailing out rather than fixing the leak. What I would say, and again, don't want to go too far into our future questions, but there is that adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, and I think organizations are very good at kind of knowing through the ether that they've got a problem with this data field, or they've got a problem with that data field, but actually they rarely measure it. They rarely kind of do a more systemic view of their data and measure the quality of the data outside of any regulatory reporting. You would want to be dealing with quality data for all of the things that you do. And I think there's a problem there, that because we don't measure, we don't manage, and because we don't manage, we end up bailing out rather than fixing the root cause.
Very good. Okay, we'll come back to the sort of narrative on that in a moment. Let's take another poll, see if we've got any more surprises for our audience. This one is going to look at the obstacles that you face when you are trying to address your firm's data integrity issues. Is the main obstacle a lack of budget or a lack of resource within your organization? Is it other priorities? We've mentioned in the question regulatory obligations, although some of those obligations clearly come back to the issue of data integrity. Is it a lack of expertise within your organization to manage or put in place processes to address this? Or is it the complexity of the workflows in your business? Is it just too much, really? So go ahead, please, and vote. And we'll see what result that yields. We'll come back to that after our next question, which I'm going to throw to Arvind first. Arvind, let's talk about resolutions, if you like. What steps should firms be taking to rectify the situation that we've sort of identified and satisfy regulators' demands for more and deeper, more granular, etc. reporting data?
Sure. So continuing from what Shailesh and Neil mentioned, to be able to do accurate and consistent regulatory reporting, there's a need for identification of granular critical data elements which support those regulatory reports or reporting in general, and then be able to show how the data moves across, the pipes from front to back, in a sense, the data lineage. And then while doing the data lineage, be able to establish or prove out the data integrity as it moves from one hop to the other, from source to target. And also be able to, when I say data lineage, it's not a one-time exercise which you do and just put it on the bookshelf and done with. No, the documentation needs to be kept live as things change or pipelines get updated or upgraded. And then the other thing which I've been trying to get it done at various different organizations is real-time data traceability to prove out the data integrity, and then to be able to help some of regulatory expectations with respect to transaction testing and other things. So that is one thing. The other and the last thing which I would mention is having a strategic vision. Instead of trying to fix data pipes or data flows, having a strategic vision to create a data lake, data platform, whatever the name be, or the appropriate underlying technologies may be, to be able to then have a singular, or I won't say singular, but at least an authoritative data source from which downstream consumption could be then provided for.
Very good. Thanks, Arvind. Over to you, Shailesh. And I think this maybe draws upon the remark earlier, I think Neil made about macro versus micro. I think what Arvind is talking about is more of a macro view, as a top-down, holistic, whatever you want to call it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think this is what Neil has also pointed out earlier. A lot of the organizations lack that big picture view, like how everybody's just looking at their own silos and this is what I need to do. And for me to be able to get this report out to the regulators, all I need to do is throw a body at this and get this cleaned up. But then we're not looking at the big picture in the sense, like, I mean, if you really think about it, how your data is getting generated, right? So your data is getting generated because there is some sort of a business process which is getting executed behind the scene, whether it's generated by the system or somebody manually keying in some data entry in some system. I think we need to look at that whole data lineage that Erwin talked about, how the data is getting started, how it's getting generated, and how it flows through various systems, and look at where those leaks are and where those challenges are, and addressing those challenges where they're happening, or just preventing those challenges from happening at that point. So, I mean, in the end, I mean, it really comes down to your foundational data management challenges in your organization, where they are, whether it's master data is not right, when you need to have a more standardized master data platform, or whether it's issues within the data lineage where data is moving from one system to another system. You need to have that full vision of it. And if you go through that exercise of identifying the business process and data lineage, it becomes clear like where the issues are. And once you understand those issues, then you can address those issues. But if you're just looking at fixing your own data before you send out the report, and not taking a step back and looking at the full picture, you're just going to continue in that loop and continue to do this. And as I said earlier, in the long term, that's just not sustainable.
Sure, you're just bailing out there. Okay, let's look at these the poll results. And the primary obstacle, it seems, is complexity of workflows. Lack of budget, yeah. Other priorities, lack of expertise, not so much. So complexity of workflows. Panelists, does that resonate with you? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. And it's probably the word I use most in my day-to-day life is around complexity, and completely agree with this. That we work in and we work for very complex organizations. And as I mentioned in my opening, they're complex within one product, they're complex within one geography, and you get different products trading with one another, different geographies trading with one another. I as much as I rant, I have huge sympathy for the practitioners, because it's just so difficult to track a data item through a flow because it's so complex. So yeah, 100%. I'm not no surprise at that answer at all.
And I mean, I'm just hearing a lot of noise about simplifying these workflows. That's a bigger challenge than a data challenge, right? That's an organizational challenge. It's a corporate view kind of challenge. So that's a bit of an obstacle.
Yeah. I was going to talk about this a bit later on, but I'll talk about it now actually, which is we could simplify. It wouldn't be easy. I was about to say it's really easy, but we could simplify, and we could look at our flows right now, and we could design a new flow, and we could put it out to tender and work with a big vendor to massively simplify our flows. So we'd do that in 2021, and we'd go to RFP in 22, we'd implement in 23, and we'd be live in 24. But of course, by 24, the front office has innovated. There's a whole load of new products, a whole load of new trading strategies, a whole set of new processes that we have to take into account. So we're going to bolt on around our lovely new simple flow, all of these other flows. And by 2028, roughly, I'm making it up, of course, we'd be back to where we are, to be honest. And let's not get depressed by that. It is great that we're innovating. It is great that we don't stand still. We need to encourage innovation and enable innovation. The trick that we haven't quite got there yet, but the trick is to have control whilst we innovate, to be in control and be innovative at the same time. We seem to be quite good at being innovative. We seem to be quite good at being in control at points. We're not great at being innovative and in control.
Very good. Okay, well, that's a good launching point, actually, Neil, for the next set of questions, really, which perhaps claw back a little bit to remarks made earlier. First one, I'll put this one to Shailesh. Is the need to quantify these data integrity issues? How should firms go about that? For whatever purpose, whether that's the way they get to manage them, or perhaps it's even just to build the business case to go about fixing the bigger problem, if you like.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to go back to what Neil was saying earlier in another segment, where you can't address things that you can't measure, right? So you have to measure it in some ways. And I think a lot of organizations are measuring data quality today, but I think the challenge is that we are measuring the data quality today in the standard data quality dimensions, like, oh, my data is 98% complete, my data is 80% accurate, or my data is 87% valid. We're putting the dimensions of data quality, as we call them, and that's what we're measuring, right? But if you're really looking to address these issues, or if you're really looking to build a business case, I think you need to look at it from that so what factor, right? So I call it so what factor, right? So my data is 80% accurate, so what, right? I think we need to start to measure these things in terms of what is the impact of that 80% accuracy, right? Does that mean I'm spending 40 hours extra in producing a report for NYDFS? Or if I am looking at this and if my data is only 98% complete, I'm spending 5 another days to figure out that rest of 2%. So I think if we start to put that or measure these issues in terms of the impact of those issues on our regulatory reporting, or even our data models, or even our business analytics, what is the impact of that issue? Then that start to resonate with people who are the decision makers on these business cases, right? So cost savings in terms of resources, any regulatory repercussions, any fines that you may be facing if you have any risks in there, any quantifiable benefits to business. Like, for example, if you're putting in when you're identifying a data lineage and you come across a situation where somebody is manually taking this transaction from one system and keying it in another system, so that one transaction may be just a 2-minute thing for somebody to do it, but if they're doing it for 500,000 transactions, and you have that, you need to build that case where you need to do that integration. If you multiply that by those 2 minutes, then you can start to quantify those cost savings. And one other point I would say is, when you're putting together your business case, you need to put it in terms of what is important to those decision makers. If your chief data officer is making a decision, if they have the financial authority, or if your CFO is making the decision, what is important to them, and highlight those benefits in your business case, that typically helps.
Very good. So in essence, not all data was created equal. In fact, it's about the impact of the data downstream, or in a particular use case. Neil, go back to the original question here. How should firms be going about quantifying these issues?
Well, I kind of had a serious answer and a tongue-in-cheek answer prepared, in my head at least. Shailesh has stolen or has covered my serious. I don't want to bore the audience by repeating it, but my tongue-in-cheek answer at least was you could do nothing actually, and just wait, because I strongly believe that the regulators are getting tougher, that the fines are getting bigger, and that the threat that you will be stopped from trading is getting more real. So if you want to prove a business case, just wait, because actually, I'll go back to your 50. You know, the 50% of people that think their data quality issue, they don't have data quality issues. I think you're wrong, but maybe that's okay. There's 50% of people that can just wait. They can just wait, and the regulator will bite, and you've got your business case. I think you should be more proactive than that, and you should follow what Shailesh says. Slightly more serious answer as well, actually, which I think is really prominent at the moment, is that you should get to know your counterparties better, and you need to work with your counterparties better. You know, and I can't pronounce his company, the Archegos disaster. That's going to be part of that, is that the sell side didn't understand or what they would, how their counterparties were behaving, and if they knew that, and if there was, I think it's just generally true, know your customer better and understand the data issues that your customer has, and understand why they're not matching with you. No, it's great that it's terrible that you're not matching at the regulator, but why aren't you matching with them internally? There are things that you need to understand about your counterparties that I suspect you're not doing. And if you did that and had that better insight and better intimacy with your counterparts, you could create a business case.
Very good. Okay, I know you're sort of chuckling there, Arvind. Seems like you're agreeing with Neil's assessment.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, as Neil said, like, yeah, you can wait till, like, your house is on fire. Yeah, that's one approach. But yeah, the proactive approach is what I would recommend, because not just for regulatory purposes, it's also making sure. Well, the added advantage is going to be for the business, as the data integrity and the quality improves, it's going to be the foundation or leverage for doing more cross-sell and growing the business lines themselves.
Very good. Okay, I'm seeing that we've got a number of questions from the audience coming in. Before I get to those, though, let's just round out this subsection of questions around sort of proactive measures that firms can take. I'll throw this one to Neil. So Neil, what, tongue-in-cheek or serious, what controls do firms need to put in place, assuming they want to do something, and how can these controls be designed to keep pace with new product innovation, which you actually mentioned a little earlier?
Yeah, and I think historically, at the heart of most of the controls infrastructures in the banks has been a reconciliation solution, and it's typically been a Nostro or a depot reconciliation solution. Those products work really well in that part of the life cycle they need to control. They work awfully across the entire life cycle, and they work badly because the data tends to be more real time. It is much more complex. It's subject to cancel and amends, and as we've discussed quite a lot, there are lots of problems around that data that are not matching problems. They're about quality problems. So I think it's really important to use the right tool for the right job. And your data control infrastructure, although it will have reconciliation as part of it, that's not the entire story. So pick the right tool, because if you don't, and I think the evidence is quite reasonably strong that people don't pick the right tools, what will happen is that your middle office, and to a degree your back office, will try to control your infrastructure with Excel, and Excel becomes a control tool of choice. Of course, that's not audited. It's subject to change. It doesn't highlight. It's not proactive. You know, I could go on and on. You shouldn't use Excel for control, and people are, because they're not reusing the right. They haven't got the right enterprise tools in place to measure their data, to control their data, to proactively alert you when there's a problem. So I think that's at the heart of the solution. Use the right tools for the right job.
Very good. Arvind,
Mhm.
what do people need to do to put
W-
controls into
Yeah,
place?
to add to what Neil mentioned, like, there's two aspects of it. Financial reconciliation or financial controls is one aspect of it. The other aspect, which I believe, like, should be brought on or implemented, is data attestation, which is both at the container level and the content level. When I say container and content, when I say container, it's more of the IT system owners. If I'm responsible for the data which I give out, like, to downstream, I should be responsible for record counts, hash totals, or even, like, headers and footer checks, and then proper application of filtering logic and other things, conditions for coalescing that data set for my downstream consumers. The more important aspect is the content level or content ownership, to prove out that what is being captured or digitized through the applications is what the actual source document represents, and then also having the appropriate due diligence done at a periodic frequency. For example, if the maturity date for a commercial loan is accurate or not, has to be then attested by the loan officer or loan origination team to say, okay, this is what the document says, this is what got digitized. So along with the financial reconciliation, there has to be a data attestation which needs to be implemented through information stewardship from front to back.
Very good, thank you. I do want to ask a few of these audience questions, quite interesting. So I'll throw this to the panel. Put your hands up if you want to answer. First question is, if an institution knows that its data is inaccurate and has been submitting that data to regulators over so many years, what are the key challenges to fixing those issues? And how much does the panel think regulators are willing to help institutions with getting that data fixed without incurring penalties? Any insight to that, Arvind?
Sure. So first and foremost, acknowledging that you have data issues and you're ready to improve on it or do something about it is what is looked by the regulators as a positive, like, sign or positive direction. And then they will work with the bank or work with the organization and then to make sure that the data is consistent and accurate, which is used for regulatory reporting. So the hesitation should not be there. It's raising their hand and saying that, yep, we understand that we have deficiencies and we are more than happy to, or we are striving to or working towards getting them reduced, and more than happy to submit to regulator scrutiny so that our processes in turn mature and improve.
Yeah, I'd really.
Yeah,
Sorry, Shailesh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree. From what I understand, regulators do look upon these as positive, that you're willing to work with them and willing to address the challenges. The only thing I would add is when you're going to them, just make sure that you're prepared in terms of how you're going to address those issues going forward. Just don't come up with the problem, but also come up with a solution and try to have that solution as addressing the root cause of the problem, not just fixing the data and putting the control in place.
Very good. Neil, you're going to say something?
Yeah, just to echo really what Arvind was saying, we have practical experience with this. We were implemented at a European bank, and we started to find a lot of data integrity problems that were evidentially being reported to the regulator. And that bank then realized that it wasn't just the current trades that had been misreported, it was actually 3 years worth of data that had been misreported. And I have to say the regulator was very helpful, actually. They did ask for it to be re-reported, to be reported correctly, but there wasn't a fine. There was a timeline set, and the bank had to comply with that timeline. They had to republish within that timeline. It was actually made more complex because, of course, the trades go to the regulator through an arm, And actually, during that 3-year time period, the bank had changed arms. So in terms of cancels and amends, there was difficulty there. But nonetheless, and we talked about complex workflows, there was some degree of complexity. But it was possible to get the data republished for the new arm and cancel all of the old publications without incurring a regulatory fine. And actually, I think the way that both the bank handled it and the regulator handled it, the bank is far more likely in the future if they find another problem to fess up, rather than trying to hide it away.
Very interesting. Just associated, if you like, or related with that, another question from the audience, this one from Dimitri. It says, isn't a large culprit here the regulators that allow these type of delays and errors to be reported? If firms are allowed to report partially correct data and neither the regulators nor the clients complain until an Archegos style reality check happens, why wouldn't they?
I've got another piece of paper here. This is another snippet from the ESMA report, actually. So I guess the question was about why do the regulators do this? And actually, there's a bit in this ESMA report about measuring the timeliness of reporting, but they've got it wrong. The regulators got it wrong and they apologise because they didn't use UTC time, they used local time. So all of their reports, all of their measures of reporting are out. I do. There's definitely a problem at the regulator. The regulators themselves are not doing themselves a great service. So we can talk about them being tough, but actually, they're receiving masses of data, and they need to be on top of that data, and they need to be spitting it out more quickly. They need to be able to understand the difference between UTC and local time, and of course, far. I mean, that's a really simple thing. If they can't get that simple thing right, what are they doing with the complex stuff? So I've got a lot of sympathy with the questioner that the regulators themselves need to handle that data better. Could do far more with that data.
Okay, last one from the audience for now, because we're getting quite a lot in here at the moment. So this one is about hierarchies. So one of the master data challenges for many organizations is the lack of a standard product hierarchy. What recommendations do you have regarding using industry standard hierarchies such as CFI, ISDA taxonomy, and ANA DSB? Any thoughts, gentlemen? Arvind.
Yeah, sure. So, well, master data, there's a slight nuance, at least in my mind, between master data and reference data. Some of the reference data is what you take from the industry standard sources, whether it's indexes, FX rates, and so on and so forth, and then utilize as a reference within the transaction. Master data is your own, whether it's a department hierarchy or organizational hierarchy or product hierarchy and other things, which could be then, it should be well defined and well managed, and there could be differences which need to be taken into consideration. What the business lines like need a particular line of hierarchy versus what reporting may need, like a different kind or reporting hierarchy, and then balancing it out. There's various industry standard tools and other things, but to me, the core, the way to handle this is at the core is proper definition of the products and their usages, and which desk or which line of business is clearly authorized to be doing business in that particular product, and so on and so forth. Without setting those standards first, the tools will create hierarchies which will get mangled pretty soon.
Interesting. So it's also a matter of knowing where to use these tools. It's about expertise, not just like a dumb process kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to add to that, and we're on the nascent Bank of England and FCA working group on executable reporting standards. So the idea here is that the Bank of England or the FCA will produce a standard, but embedded within that standard will be executable code that will acquire the data and validate the data. And I think for that to be successful, there's lots and lots of things that have to happen. But one of the things that has to happen is a move to standard taxonomy, standard hierarchies, standard classifications, because otherwise I don't see those executable reporting standards as having a chance of working at all. So I think, yes, that will happen. And I think the work that the Bank of England are doing is particularly relevant here.
Very good. Okay. Let's get back to our script, as it were. As you can see, we're working from some prepared questions. But do keep those questions coming in. Great sets of questions today. So let's go to back to you, Neil, on this one, getting a bit more granular. Is a single source of truth attainable or even desirable? And if it is desirable, how can it be attained?
Well, you've only got to look at those linkage errors. 50% of trades are not linked, to think that actually, wouldn't it be wonderful if both sides of a transaction reported into a single source of truth? A few years ago, we were talking about the blockchain being that source of truth. So wouldn't that be wonderful? So I think, to an extent, it is desirable. We would remove the linkage errors, and we would have a common view of transactions, so there'd be no matching problems at all. All really good. However, and I come back to something that I said earlier, really, which is we want organizations to be innovative. We want them to be able to do things differently, and I think that's really important. Actually, it's really important for society that our banks thrive and prosper and create wealth for the wider society. And I think things like a single source of truth slow that down. If you've got to innovate, and you've got to make sure that you work with a single source of truth, you won't innovate as quickly. The innovators are the ones that do things differently. They're not the people that follow the standard. In fact, standards are an anathema to innovation. So I think ultimately it is not a desirable end game. I'd love to see those linkage errors go away, and a single source of truth would make them go away. But I think that's not a desirable end game for our industry. It's too locked down, too difficult to innovate.
It's a trade-off, in other words, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shailesh, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Neil on that. I mean, in terms of single source of truth, I mean, in reality, there's really not a single source of truth, or said in another way, I mean, my truth would be different from Arvind's truth, and would be different from Neil's truth, depending on what the question I'm trying to answer, right? So you can have all the data in one place, in one big data lake, or like data swamp, or whatever you want to call it, and designate that as your single source of truth. But depending on the question that you're trying to answer, you will have to attach a different set of views on top of that, in the sense, like, if you're looking at from a product lens, then you need to make sure that your product hierarchy is accurate. The transaction data can be the same, but the way you're applying, whether it's a product hierarchy or a geographical hierarchy or regulatory hierarchy, whatever lens you're applying it to, depending on what you're looking at, if you don't have that master data accurately applied, if you don't have the master data, then you'll always get a different answer. So in my view, the single source of truth is more of a master data problem than a transactional data problem. And I think we need to look at it from that angle as well, and make sure we have our master data set right.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to move right along because we are getting short of time. Let me throw the next question to Arvind. What measures can practitioners take to wring out the last errors from their workflow? So this is kind of an optimistic kind of question, Arvind, assuming that people are really at that final, final mile to getting perfect data.
Yeah, that would be the nirvana state. That's like, yeah, trying to attain perfection, which according to me, as Neil was saying, if you want to innovate, you will be making some mistakes, and then you will learn from those and improve on those and other things. The business process and the data flows will have to adjust and improve. But in broad strokes, if you want to at least stamp out the known errors or the known issues, is to have, there's two sides of the coin, the producer and the consumer. They're back to back, but most of the times they don't see each other's viewpoints, or they don't understand each other's processes and data capture requirements and other things. Having them tried, like, to be able to like see each other's process and understand each other's requirements is going to, like, make sure that the data capture at the source is also taking into consideration what earlier Shailesh was mentioning, is that most of the times we see errors at the most, like, the rightmost end or at the last mile. And then that's what, like, needs to happen, is those requirements then need to be embedded into the data capture points at the source, which will improve the overall integrity and then take out certain, I would say, things falling through the cracks or the data integrity issues. So it's more of that. And then, as the things which Neil was mentioning, is to have as the business innovates and then tries to, like, time it to, like, market, having a continuous and deep data profiling capabilities will help you understand, as the data, business process and the data supporting it evolves over time, there's a need to review that periodically to understand, and then those changes, and then make the changes to the data sets to support it. And having adaptive business rules is equally important, because we normally, like as Shailesh was mentioning, it's a standard DQ rule which is implemented and forgotten. No, you got to have adaptive rules to the changing business processes and the changing business flows itself. The other thing which also makes sense to have is to have a view of the complete data set or the records across, like, different business lines and business processes, so that then there is at least an baseline understanding of how that data is used by different lines of business, and there's at least a consistency maintained or at least achieved to be able to service those business lines. And then identifying patterns or relationship between different data sets. As Shailesh was mentioning, there cannot be a single truth for everyone. So yes, I understand there's the truth for me versus the truth for Shailesh, but there can be a commonality or identifying the patterns to connect those two truths. It's the same JPMC as a counterparty, but what role does it play on a particular line of business transaction will differ. But having a baseline and identifying a pattern is equally important.
Very good. Neil?
I think that what Arvind said is true. I completely agree that we should have the right infrastructure in place, right controls in place, right technology in place. I also think, and I was thinking this as I looked at my screen with these four middle-aged men talking about data quality, that we're all a bit tired of this, actually, and I'm probably misrepresenting Arvind and Shailesh. We're so used to seeing these errors that we don't shout out. We need to refresh our organizations, or at least empower our organizations to shout out and scream when they see a data quality problem, rather than just, oh, it's not gone wrong again, has it? Oh, okay, well, we'll move on. Because I think we're tired of it. We've seen it for a long time. We need to refresh our organizations and empower our organizations, give them the right tools so they can see the visibility of it. But get rid of these middle-aged men, for Christ's sake. Oh, excuse me. Get rid of these middle-aged men and refresh our organizations, please.
So we lost our sense of outrage, perhaps.
We have lost our sense of outrage. I started off by pointing at this ESMA report. It is outrageous. But we read it and we just oh, it's more of the same.
Yeah, it's a bit like gunboats arriving in Jersey this morning, and everyone just shrugging their shoulders.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, slightly off piece there. Right, let's have a look. We've got one more question. I've got a nagging question here from the audience. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because it sort of touches on what you talked about earlier, Neil, about this embedding the code in the regulators' forms and what have you. So the question is, why can't regulators come up with more standard guidelines to get the processes around getting the right data? The questioner cites the LEI being one example. We've sort of mentioned this, but LEI was mandated in a bunch of regulations. Is that the kind of the answer?
I'll have a go, and it's kind of contradicting my earlier answer, really, because I'm really excited about this codifying the regulations. But the problem with codifying the regulations is it allows organizations to sometimes get away with things, doesn't it? Because it's far better for the regulator to say, tell me about all of your risky trades. Tell me about all the things that keep you awake at night, and have you decide what is the risky business. If the regulator says, I want you to report trades that are this, this, and this, then you don't report the that, and whether that could be really risky. So I do think there is a degree of latitude in the regulation that is deliberately there to enable or to force organizations to think about what they need to report. So it is a contradiction to my earlier answer, but I think that's what the regulators do.
It's a bit like the old multiple choice questions at school, which I always found, always fairly easy. You can always guess that. But if you're given a blank sheet of paper, it's much more difficult, and you're going to give a lot more away about what you really know, I think.
Exactly.
Okay.
To add to what Neil was saying, it's like, okay, you can do all the lab tests and determine the stats or the numbers coming from those lab tests. Yes, but still, a conversation with the doctor is equally important to understand, as Shailesh was earlier mentioning, is what is the root cause. You may have a pain on your right, foot. It can be because you're outgrown your shoe, or is it something in your spinal cord which is wrong, which is putting weight on your right foot. So that is what matters. Regulators should be used, that conversation should be used to actually improve the organizational processes.
Very good. Okay, look, guys, we're pretty much out of time. So I did want to quickly touch on benefits and so on, but let's just maybe do it in a nutshell, go through the panel and sort of elevate a pitch as to why you should act and soon. So let's start with you, Shailesh.
Well, in short, basically, if you get this right, then no matter how the regulation changes in future, if you get the foundation right, you have that foundation, and then any new regulation and compliance with the new regulation becomes a rather smaller project than a huge program that you need to do from scratch every time there's something new coming up. So, for example, if you had done GDPR right, then CCPA just becomes a smaller project instead of doing CCPA all over again.
Very good. Neil?
I think the benefits are way outside of regulation. I talked about the fines and all that kind of stuff. This is about running your business, and how can you run your business if your data is so inaccurate? And the regulators are shining a light on all those inaccuracies. You should want to fix those inaccuracies in the absence of regulators, because you'll run your business better if you understand your business more.
Arvind?
To add to what both Shailesh and Neil are saying, is I take a slightly added viewpoint to that. Is I get asked the question by businesses, what is in it for them? And that's what I try to answer, is that because of the improved data integrity, yes, you can actually deliver benefits or at least aspects which business cares. measuring the client profitability, having a 360-degree view of the client retention, and capital forecasting and other things. You're setting the foundation right, and then these benefits to the business will come.
Very good. Okay, that's pretty clear as to why you should really act now. Let me wrap things up by, first of all, thanking our panelists. Great, lively session today, gentlemen. Not bad for 4 middle-aged guys, I would say. Thanks, Arvind. Thanks, Shailesh. Thanks, Neil. I would thank also our audience for today and point you in the direction of future events. We have a RegTech Summit coming up in just a few weeks, and more webinars around some of the topics that we discussed today, namely data quality, regulatory reporting, and the like. So please join us. These are all free of charge at the point of consumption. And with that, I will bid you farewell. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.